the perception that speed, or what we anticipate or consider speed, as being a factor that is predominant. I mean, speed, efficiency, that's all a great outcome. But if it's at the expense of even benign hazards being created that we've discussed, or even worse, at the expense of process safety, and threatens our license to operate, I think we need to relook that culture. And so, to me, the question is, once again, is how do we move the needle on that? And really make an impact, a financial impact on the industry, because we do have that perception. And secondly, I think what's really, really most important is, I guess, the realization that even the simple things like connection time, like cleaning the wellbore, like fingerprinting, that really lead to a more sustainable, more efficient operation become predominant as opposed to secondary. So that's kind of my issue.
Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, we're talking about affecting a step change in both the industry as it perceives the correct focus and as it deals with what I'll call common, ordinary events that we've heard about and talk about all the time. For example, we've all heard the phrase early kick detection. Ooh, how does that work? What does that mean? How can a real-time system, proactive real-time system, change that dynamic? Because if you're understanding that you're developing the conditions which create a kick situation, doesn't that give you a better handle and a better opportunity to manage that situation and control it yourself, as opposed to having the kick being the dictating of the terms?
Yes, it is. And we have to understand, again, relative to the architecture of our system, we're interested in identifying the trend conditions and the behaviors that are conducive for the formation of a kick. Again, that's proactive. Most of the time, kicks occur in trends. Kicks begin to develop and evolve over hours, even days. So when we're actually identifying those conducive conditions, like the Weather Service, of when those behaviors are beginning to occur, gives ample time, and this is where it comes back to the rig floor, for the driller and others to be aware of it and to be able to solve the problem. And that's, again, what I would call a proactive real-time system, which again we'll call RTAS, which is our system, that enables, facilitates that lead time for hazard avoidance, and hazards being anywhere from the worst of the worst consequence of the Macondo down to the most minimal of simply losing a barrier or sticking pipe. And this, to me, is what the industry is missing.
Okay. So, how do we affect that change? What kind of actions do you see that leadership from both the operators and the drillers or others, perhaps insurance industry or regulators, may need to play in this? Or is there a role?
I think there is. I know that that proactive has been, or our test has been introduced to some of the insurance companies and some of the underwriters, and they're taking a real positive look at this. We're going to see a culture change in the insurance companies. We're all aware that the insurance companies are losing an enormous amount of money at the present time. And so that's going to change this next year. Whether that becomes another hazard to the oil industry or not, I think it's going to change. The other problem that I see is with the investors. The investors are going to demand a change. This drilling quickly, we've already proven that, to your point, David, that this so-called efficiency culture or this speed culture does not produce more oil, and that they're producing more wells, but they're not putting the money back into the investors' pockets. And without the investors, you don't have an industry. So I'm seeing that those are going to be the culture change. And those companies that do make that culture change are the ones that's going to survive when they're small independents.
Doesn't leadership mean that you get ahead of a problem?
Exactly.
Right? If you don't have leadership and the insurance industry forces the industry to do something, that's a lot different. If you've got good, effective leadership, they get ahead of the problem. They put the proper training in place, they put the proper tools in place. This is where our task would come in, right? This is simply a tool that you put right at the well center, right at the well, at the driller's console, effectively, right? At the well site, right? To mitigate problems. Best kick is no kick at all, right? So if you stop it before it happens, right, and you stop it at the well site, and you've given those tools to them, isn't that good leadership? Right? That's where leadership needs to be. We're not there throughout the industry, we're there in parts of it, and in large parts of it, but there's another area that doesn't have that leadership that we need to affect.
And I agree.
So how does a simple issue like software improve leadership?
And also, you know, when it comes to culture, changing culture, you hear a lot of people very frequently say, culture changes from the top down. But I wonder if that might not be completely true. And you mentioned having, not completely
You can also
true.
stop culture change from top down too.
Exactly. Right? So having it in front of the driller, having him involved in this workflow, getting those watches to his eye, and allowing him to go up with that information, I think could also make a pretty big impact on culture. Kind of going off of what you're saying, getting it to the rig crew, letting them ultimately do a lot of the job that's happening elsewhere right now, getting it in their hands, giving them the tools that they need to do. I think that could help drive culture as well.
You know, one thing that I saw totally different from this, but it's just an example of this issue. You have different groups that have different motivations, financial motivations, financial incentives. I'm talking about the individuals, their bonus structure and all that. And there would be times where we would have something wrong with the system and we knew it needed to be fixed, and we take it in, but it's going to cost somebody else. If we do it, then that's going to affect their income. They didn't want to do it. And I think that's a question I have for you guys more on the drilling side, is that will we have pushback from that? Does that need to change as well as part of the culture? The way people are rewarded for, when we drill it faster, we get a bonus, you know, and just kind of ignore these things and move on. That's just a question I have.
Where I'm drilling, if you don't drill properly, we're not drilling.
Right,
Like, you can either have a job or not,
right,
right? Forget the bonus for doing a good job. You've got a job,
right,
right? And there's a certain level of expectation on it. It's the old, we used to joke about, well, if we drilled 50 days and we did 30 wells, there's 150 days worth of wells, right?
Mhm.
Sounds great. Company can't afford that. It's not going to work. So you better cut those well days down, right? Or you're not going to have a job,
right.
right? There's
That's
a changing
That's
dynamic.
it.
It's
So-
a different it's a
Right,
different
it is.
incentive,
Yes,
but it
it
is.
is.
To expand on my pet peeve by way of example, I mentioned the 6 wells a while ago, where the 5 were benign and the 6 disaster struck, but the BOP did close. That event cost that company at least 10 to 12 days of lost time. You say real quick, that's $1 million or more. Plus, had the BOPs not closed, the consequence of spewing hydrogen sulfide gas all over a town site were enormous. Imagine what that would do to our industry. So you're sitting there with that consequence. And yet, when I interviewed part of the drill team, the complete drill team on the incident, the last interviewee said is, yes, but you have to remember, we set a rotating record to total depth. And I'm thinking, you know what? That's the last thing I want to remember. How do we overcome that culture? How do we overcome that? I want a bit record trophy and I want to be known for the fastest ROP, because it goes to your point, Joel. And so this to me is part of the issue. And you know, when we think about it real quick, let's talk about Oklahoma, the prior trust. I've been told, and I think reliably, that will be at least a low to mid-figure, 9-figure legal cost range. Not to mention loss of lives. Does it take that hundreds of millions of dollars in losses to get the industry's attention? Is that where we are? Or can we do it with systems, or can we do it one at a time? To me, those are all valid questions is that this industry really needs to ask and answer. And it does go to leadership.
That's all they're on.
One of the problems that I see in having done this for a while is we had the Macondo happen. And we were supposed to take all these lessons learned and all these things from it. Let's take what you're talking about in the Oklahoma deal. We've had at least 6 incidents where people have been trapped on the rig floor before the Oklahoma. There was no lessons learned there. There was nothing resolved in that problem. This fast drilling, this fast area that we live in right now, this speed is everything. We've got to start looking at this as a risk management side of things. What is your risk of drilling that quick? What is the ultimate right there? That company that's in Oklahoma that owns that, they're broke, they're gone. And Patterson's going to suffer a large loss too. The rig company's going to suffer a large cost too. So where is the risk management with these companies? You mentioned a while ago connections right there. When we're pushing connections to be speed over the fact that the well may be ballooning or losing, and you're not taking the time to observe that, you're not getting the knowledge of that. Two of the biggest issues that I see that could turn in very quickly is, let's take ballooning for instance. Ballooning, you either accept it, fix it, or you wait up. And what happens is that there's no standard right now for determining what ballooning, whether the well's ballooning or whether it's actually flowing. And because of risk management, the people go to the opposite side of it. They go in and they wait up. Well, what does that do? That creates more ballooning and more right there. And eventually you've got a lost circulation event that creates even more hazards.
Leads to stuck pipe, leads to kicks,
and
which by the way is precisely what happened on the March 8th kick on the Macondo that's very few people are aware of. And it cost BP just that one isolated incident over $20 million to recover.
Mm-hmm. And so the things that, and you just mentioned a good word right there, is recovery. We look at things in days as this was a 10-day event, this was a 5-day event, this was a 10-hour event. That's not true. Mm-hmm. Your recovery on that well never ends. You're always going back and doing something, like you said a while ago, Jim, it's in the back of your mind, so even though we've cleaned that well up and we're going ahead, we're still not recovered from that. And that may affect the next well and the fact that we haven't recovered from it.
And or the next hole section, because again, on the Macondo, when the March 8th kick occurred, they literally had to sidetrack and they burnt a string of casing. And when they did that, that left the entire bottom hole condition at risk, and it was at risk.
Mhm.
So you can really build a case that the March 8th kick was contributory towards the entire blowout, and it was. So, you know, the issue is, and again, in some ways it gets back to money, because we have to convince the industry, we have to have a system that absolutely identifies avoidable lost time and proves to the industry that this need for speed is costing money, not just every now and then, but almost on a daily basis.
Exactly.
So, and until we can develop that, and you mentioned KPIs, that really becomes the leading KPI in the industry. How long does it take you to solve a problem?
Mhm.
We've heard time and again in this industry that, well, you really didn't know what would have occurred. Well, now we have a system that shows when it begins to evolve. And when you can do that, you can't fix it unless you can measure it. So measuring that avoidable lost time, to me, is part of the crucial solution that's badly needed in the industry.
One of the pet peeves that I have is the ticket and click it right there. In other words, we have a problem come up on the well, especially in morning calls. We're discussing what some of the problems were yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that we have a stuck pipe incident, for instance. There's no way that we're going to drill that down to find out what caused that, because we've got so many rigs running that we've got so pressed for time, and we don't have the critical thinking to do it. All of these things respond to the fact that, okay, well, we talked about it for 35 minutes. We wasted 24 hours on people's time on doing this. Let's click it and move on. And so what happens is, in the next few weeks, if you've got a large rig fleet, you're stuck again. The same area, the same place, no warning, and you spend it. Then all of a sudden that becomes an issue, and all of a sudden we're solving it not by data, not by actual thing. It goes to the reactive again. Mm-hmm. All you have is reactive data that told you after the fact that you were stuck. Nobody wants to go back and look forward, look behind that. It's stuck. Okay, so what did we do to get unstuck? Well, okay, let's reverse that. What did we do to get stuck? That's never
Part of the discussion.
right.
So there's accountability, there's responsibility. And I'm sorry, Jim, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, all of the systems right now are set up to analyze the problem when you know the problem's already occurred. So we're stuck in the hole. You get your RTOC, you get all the people in the RTOC lined up, and they go, "Oh yeah, look, we've got this trend happening. Oh yeah, we know why we got stuck." But nothing while that was happening was alarming.
Yeah.
We can find it once we get stuck. We know where to look. You look previous to that point, right? The system you've got here, this is the whole point of it in my mind, is that it does the trending for you. It follows that logic and identifies the problem before you have the problem. Whether it's kick or stuck pipe, like I said, the best kick to have is no kick at all. So stop creating the kick conditions, stop creating the stuck pipe conditions, do that work. If you've got a tool that does it, it's the only one out there. Everybody else is diagnostic after the fact.